But then the last chapters of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48, there's 9 chapters that we're observing the idea of what the glory he sees in this temple. This temple has never been built. It is a vision that he sees. And if you open your Bibles to the first part, chapter 40, you'll have the date. We haven't seen a date of Ezekiel's prophecy since chapter 32 and verse 1. But now we're down into the 25th year of their captivity. So if you say 597 was when Jehoiachin, that's when his group came in. That's Ezekiel's time. And then it's also the 14th year after the city was smitten. That's 586. You'd come up with 572 BC. Is when the time that we're looking at. So on this particular chart, you have that 572 BC. That's the reason for that. So Jehoiachin has been in captivity for that long a time, but he's not dead, and he doesn't die. We see here him at the end of the Kings that he's being set forth as at the king's table. And you read that in your Kings and Chronicles. And it's just interesting to me that the archaeology has found out that as they have uncovered things in the Babylonian clay tablets, there's things like 2.5 inches by 2 3/4 inches, records of the daily rations that they gave to Jehoiachin and his children. It's interesting how much oil that they had, so many quarts a day that they would have. But they found under the Babylonian tablets, they found that evidence that, well, did Jehoiachin live? Was there a battle at Carchemish where Nebuchadnezzar defeated the Egyptians and knocked off the Assyrians for good at that time? Was there anything called Jehoiachin? Was Zedekiah? All those names are found in the records. So it's not, our Bibles are not just, I'll tell you a story and make up names. These are names of history. And as they unearth evidence, they uncovered, I think this under the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, which is where all this was found, of 6th century tablets. There's a bunch of them. They found that. And I thought that would be kind of interesting to know we're dealing with a time frame, 597. It fits with the things that the Bible says. So when the Bible, people say, well, that's just a book men and put together, and there's not any evidence that historical evidence that contradicts it. It doesn't. It just, archaeology confirms it a lot of times. And that's just one tidbit that we have. But I want us to remind ourselves what we're seeing here and kind of get some points of what is the focus. Why did the Israelites go into captivity? Talking about the southern kingdom, talk about the Nebuchadnezzar destroying Jerusalem, destroying the temple. Why did that happen? If you just think back what we're looking at, and especially going to be here with what God is doing and what indeed is going to be happening at the east gate. This is the east gate. Sun rises. Here's your holy temple. You got the most holy place back there, about 150 feet wide building. Behind there, we don't know what that purpose was for that. Do you notice any gate back here on the back on the west side? No gates. The only gate of entrance is the outer court on the south and the north and the east. And what we find is that when he sees this vision, he takes him up in a high mountain, the first 5 or 6 verses of Ezekiel 40, takes him up in a high mountain, and he sets before him the form, scale of the walls. And I've thought about, well, it's just a little minor scale, and they're just playing little things. He sees visions. And when you look at the outer walls, it's 875 feet times 875 feet times 875 feet. You talk about square feet. This is a big area. So he didn't see a little markup. He sees definite cubits as he's there. We see in the first few verses that a cubit, when he talks about the rod or the reed in some of your translations, that's set there is 6 cubits plus a handbreadth. So we look at 18 inches, usually a cubit, add 3 more, a head breadth. And so this rod would be 21 inches, and that'd be 10.5 feet. So sometimes he'll check the thickness of this wall right here. It's 10.5 feet thick. It's 10.5 feet high. And what's significance about that? I don't know. But it's very specific, and it's very definite. 10.5 foot wide of thick wall, that's pretty good. It's kind of hard to get through that one. 10.5 feet, I can pole vault over that. Used to. You could just go over that one. That's not 20, 30, 40 feet. But that's what he's seeing. And these measurements are there. They're in cubits. I went through there, and in my mind, there's 20 different types, 20 different cubits that are being mentioned. I converted them to feet. That's what I think. I don't think in cubits. To see the how sometimes they're 20 cubics square. They talk just like Solomon's temple in the sense of how perfect it is for the inner sanctuary. And what we're going to be seeing that from this temple, we're going to be from this temple that we're looking at. Let me get back here. What we're observing, there's a throne in there. And he doesn't describe it. He just said, that's my throne. And what we're going to be observing also that we can think of in the apocalyptic literature is that from that throne room, as we talked about last week, comes a river right through here to the east gate. And it goes toward the Jordan River to empty into the Dead Sea. And we'll see that picture that he has. And what is interesting, and we'll deal with this, I think we'll deal with a lesson that this temple hasn't been built yet. When do you think most people in the religious world thinks it's going to be built? And it'll be built in Jerusalem, according to them. The millennium. This is where Jesus is going to reign for 1,000 years. It'll be built there in Jerusalem. He's the prince that we read here. But they say that's when it's going to be. My thought is that, well, he wants us to see the glory of this, and we're going to see the specifics. And remember, we've been looking at that when you come back from your captivity, when Ezekiel started prophesying, Jerusalem hadn't been destroyed yet. There was teaching said by a couple of years we'll be back in Jerusalem. And Zedekiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Jeremiah was trying to tell them no. And Ezekiel was dealing with people already in captivity. We're going to get out of here. No, your city's going to be destroyed. Well, we're at 572. Has the city been destroyed? Yes. And now they realize, no, what they've been telling is true. But the glory of God is going to come back to God's people. Now, we can talk about the church, but what you're going to be seeing here, and this is the point about the millennium, all the Old Testament sacrifices will be in place. What do we have here? We have the altar that's right here. At this northern gate, you've got 12 tables. You have 4 on this side, 4 on this side, on the outside as you enter into that north gate where the animals will come in. And as you get onto the porch, enter into this area of the altar, you have some more tables there. They were there for outside to cleanse the burnt offerings. There were tables of stone, about 2.5 feet high, and that was where they put their utensils. I think of like a surgeon, on the stone tables that they have there. All of that was there, and offering sacrifices, burnt offerings, sheep, goats, and you begin to realize, is that what's going to happen in the millennium? And here's an argument that I think is crazy, but it's one that's used. Well, you also know that all Israel is going to be saved in the millennium. All Israel. And that's what we're studying on Sunday morning, Romans 11. That's where we're going to see all Israel is going to be saved. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, since they're going to be teaching people the gospel in the millennium, and their fellow Jews are all going to be saved, and they have a right to see the Old Testament law obeyed like it ought to be obeyed. So they're going back to the old sacrifices. Well, we studied Hebrews. That blood of bulls and goats couldn't take away sin. What's that called? It's called the shadow of the things to come. We're going to hold to a shadow? It doesn't mean it. It's not, well, that's all about the church. No, there's a message from that. He's seeing this. And I'll just say, and we'll get on it tonight, hopefully. Chapter 8, we saw the glory of Jehovah leaving. Chapters 8 and 10, you saw the glory of Jehovah leaving Jerusalem, because I'm going to destroy it. And you saw, chapter 8, you saw 25 men in that inner court with their heads to they were worshiping, they're inside the holy place of the temple, and they were looking to the east, and they were not looking for the coming of the glory of Jehovah. They were looking for the praising and worshiping the sun god. Ezekiel dealt with that. And his glory left. Well, we'll see tonight, where does the glory of God enter again in this vision? It comes right to the east gate. He shuts the door and he ain't leaving. He's not leaving. He's not. And what does all that mean? There's a significance of what he's trying to get these people to do. Secondly, we've dealt with this last week, but it's to bring people up to speed. Change the spirit within me. People say, well, God's going to put a spirit miraculously in you, but all the context we see in Ezekiel is that when they go through the punishment of 70 years, their heart will be changed. I'll put a new spirit in you. It's always interesting, the context of the discipline that they were going through. And that's going to take place. I'll put a new spirit within you. And one of the things that we saw, and we'll see it again tonight in this vision, he said, you're going to loathe yourselves of how you acted. The discipline is going to be there. You're going to loathe yourselves about that. You're going to realize how horrible you were. And it's interesting. God said, well, he's merciful God, and he's long-suffering. He didn't want to hurt your feelings too much. He said, you're going to see that. And what this vision, we've already seen. He said, I want us, what you hear and what you see in your heart. So I want us to get into our heart. And what keeps coming up to here, the heart is, here is the glory of Jehovah. He left, and look how glorious it is now in the vision. But it's talking about the church, our millennium kingdom, all those things. All that doesn't fit very well. While we go talk about the church and we're offering up sacrifices unto God. We've got one. So it's not that, but it's the point, the teaching. He said, I want you to say every little detail. And then our eyes go blind trying to go cubit to feet, and how many times you got to make that calculation. And it's good to do, and I think he gives us indication why he did it that way too. So I want us to see just what he sees, and we'll talk a little bit about this. What you see, these are the gates. And what you don't see, and it's interesting to me, you see these are steps. And you'll see it here, but outside, going up into the outer gate, the first gate you go through, and we're going to talk about the east, you have 7 steps. And every time you go in from the outer court to the inner court, then you'll go into 7 steps, because you have these gates, 3 more gates, going into the inner court of the temple area. The steps are ascending. The temple area is ascending. I don't know how many steps were going into the temple itself. When I read it through, I never saw that. But some say, well, maybe it went to 10. I don't know. But I know you had steps leading up to this altar. While you're in the inner court, there were steps leading up to that altar, and there were steps leading up into the temple. I don't know exactly how they were, but they've been ascending from the outside, getting higher and higher and higher, in a sense of getting closer to the glory of God. And this glory is being set forth there before our eyes. That river that's going to be coming out, we talked about that. You can see it in dreams, you can see it in visions, but it just starts out and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper every 1,500 feet. to the point that you have to swim. And what that water does, it goes into the Jordan River, goes down into the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba after a while. And it's interesting, the Dead Sea is not dead. What's happening? We saw it last week, just to bring everybody to speed. Fish are going. There's life. And what we see from this apocalyptic literature, what do we see coming from the throne in Revelation? That's a river of life, that we're going to be able to have access to the paradise, the tree of life that's in paradise in heaven. What's that? Eternal life. And the point is, there's the glory of God. And he says, this is coming straight from the throne. And he doesn't describe the throne. What's that throne seat look like? He takes the inner court, the holy place, and the most holy place. We got the altar out here and there. And there's a table there. But the idea, he said, why would that be a throne? Because that's where his holy presence was. And you people, you started work in that temple. You worship the sun god from the east. Who created everything? God did. And the glory of God, he just hammers them to realize you're going to regret that. And here's this picture of this glorious image set forth. It's a vision, has specific and heights and depths and that sort of thing. But in these, and we got a question here. Why are we having this? I'm leading up to where we can maybe make an answer to that. You have a lot of places here. You've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, nothing on the back. Those are areas, and they're all symmetrical, and they are places where they think the priest would eat the sacrifices. You know, we got a lot of priests. They would all serve their special time, and they would be eating of the sacrifices of God. There's a number of those. It said those would be places where those priests would be eating, and the preparation of the food at the priest's kitchens in the four corners there is where they would prepare that. We always say, well, they were to eat the sacrifices on some of the different sacrifices they offer. Well, he has a picture. This is where that is happening. When you enter into the gates, notice these little slender windows. They're there because they're going to be slender, but each one of those has 3 little cubicles on each side of the gate. They're there for the guards. They're there for the guards. And before you enter into even the outer court, you have the guards on 3 on each side. In every one of those gates, you got guards. People didn't guard themselves too well for the holiness of God. Now, this is where that's happening. And you're coming from that east gate, you have that. Those particular pillars there are 90 feet high. 90 feet high. That's just standing up from home plate to first base. That gets pretty high. And you're having the idea of looking at something that's just, well, it stands out there. That's not how high everything else is. It's standing there. It's ready to enter into 150 feet from, it's about 37 and a half feet here, 150 feet as we're going into the inner court through this other gate. But these other gates will be the same. They would have their steps leading up to there. So we're going higher and higher and higher in elevation, 7, 8 steps. And we're getting closer to the temple of God. And I think this class understands when Moses was involved in setting forth the tabernacle and the holy place, the most holy place. We see there where the glory of God would fill the temple, didn't it? And that's what did they have? What did they have? You have the Ark of the Covenant and the cherubim looking over there. There was the mercy seat. That's where God would meet his people in that most holy place. And it would fill the temple with all of his glory. And what was the first image that Ezekiel receives on the river Kibar? And he speaks here. That's when, he said, this is what if you read all those chapters, 40 through 49, 44, 48, you'll see that this is the glory I saw there when he came to destroy Jerusalem. Ezekiel said that was the image of, well, it was just showing the glory of God. It's not a UFO. It's not a flying saucer with lights going everywhere. It's a glory of God. He said, this is just like it. But the glory of God's coming back. And he's shutting the door. And he's not leaving. And what he's finding is that he's going to be entering here. And so we see, trying to see some other areas that, but this is the outer court, and there's the inner court, there's the altar, it's in the middle. All the different sacrifices are being washed and prepared, and this is a place where they would eat of their sacrifices out here. And so nothing in the back, there's no entryway there. Inside the temple area, and this has a picture here, you'll notice, you say, as you get inside the temple, there's 30 rooms on the ground floor. You got 30 more rooms on the second floor, and you got 30 more rooms on the third floor. There's a mid door and all of that you can go out, but there's places in both ends of it. How would you get from the first, second, and third floor? In Solomon's temple, 1 Kings 6 and verse 8, is a spiral staircase. And things people, well, that was what's on the end, but you also had an entrance where you could go up and down. What those rooms for, I don't know. But what's interesting is that they get wider the higher they go. So you got smaller rooms here, and then the second floor, a little bit wider room here as they finish out the 30. And then you got wider rooms on the very top. And all that is that places where, you know, it's the glory of God is there, and maybe people surrounding that. I don't know. But that's exactly what he sees. And with those thoughts in mind, let's just answer the question: what is the date 572? What does he see? I've just kind of give you an idea. Is there any questions on that that diagram there that you might have? I'm sure you read 9 chapters of Day of Ezekiel. Maybe it's your daily Bible reading. I don't know. But if you didn't do that, I know you're not prepared to maybe say that. But those who've been in the class we have. So let's see how far we can get today. What does he see? And he sees. And that's interesting. Does he take a tour? You get into reading this. Does he take a tour? Let's look at chapter 40 and notice who meets him on this particular occasion. In verse 3, or verse 2, in the visions of God brought he me into the land of Israel, set me down upon a very high mountain, wherein was as it were the frame of a city on the south. So you looking south, and there's this frame of a city. Pretty wide square footage that he's going to be looking at. He brought me hither, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, shining. I think you wouldn't miss him. And he's the one, has the linen flask in his hand and a measuring reed. He stood in the gate, and they're going to come through the east gate. And man said to me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes, hear with thine ears, and set thy heart upon that I shall show thee. For the intent is that I may show them unto thee, art thou brought hither. Declare all that thou seest to the house of Israel. And so he takes him into these gates. He takes him on a tour. And when you read these chapters, you begin to realize that he started in the east gate. With your text, come with me to chapter 40. And you go in the east in verse 6. And then he measures all those, and then he brought me into the inner court, and lo, there were chambers in a pavement made for the court round about. 30 chambers were up on the pavement. There's those 30 that I talked about in this outer courts. Where does he go next? Verse 20. The gate of the outer court, whose prospect is toward the north, he measured the length thereof and the breadth thereof, as he's measuring with that rod. So he goes from the north. So if you're going east, and then you go around the corner there, north, but he's been on the outer court. Now, look at verse 24. He led me toward the south, and behold, a gate toward the south, and he measured the posts thereof and the arches thereof according to these measures. So he's on the outer court. Now he goes to the south court. And then what does he do in verse 28? He goes to the inner court of which gate? The south. So I'm over here in the south. I've measured all the outer courts, and they're all exactly the same gates. And now I go to the south gate of the inner court. So he's on a tour. Have you ever been on a tour at a wonderful place? That's what it is. You say here's so many cubits. All these are there. He doesn't make much comment about it. He doesn't make much comment about the inner sanctuary of the temple. Things that we see in Solomon's temple, he doesn't mention about that. But when he said, well, I want you to take it to heart, it's when he speaks about things. He speaks about the priests, he speaks about the offerings, he speaks about those things that they had completely destroyed and how they reacted toward their idolatrous ways. And he's getting them to see God's glory, and this is the way it's supposed to be. And it's not that they're going back under the shadow so the Jews could be saved in the last time. That's a perversion of Scripture from another angle. But it is a picture of now there's hope that indeed God's glory is going to be restored. And here's a picture that they could identify with. So we're on that tour. We begin to see the steps are a little higher every time we go. So let's just deal with this. What is the purpose for the minute and extensive measuring of the temple? I mean, there's things a cubit high, there's things 25 cubits, and here's what I did in mine, and I may be wrong because there's everybody differently. That rod, that reed was idea of 6 cubits and a handbreadth of each. So every cubit was a larger cubit for that rod. And it comes out 10 and a half feet, 10 and a half feet, 10 and a half feet. But everything else he said cubits. So I'm taking that 18 inches. He didn't say that, and that was only for that rod, that reed, as some of our versions have. So I made that 21 inches, and it kind of turns out 10 and a half, it comes out a half real easily that way of the measurements that he gives. But why do you think there's extensive measurements? You got that man, he's got a flax, and he's out measuring this, and then measuring the thickness of the walls. He uses that rod and that reed. And I'm not saying that it tells you, but that's an observation. If I'm sitting there wanting to see this, and I'm supposed to tell these people, why do you have it that way? I mean, from the very beginning, God gave Noah a pattern for building the ark, right? Or does he just say, hey, see what you can do? Very specific things. And I know Noah, he obeyed all that God commanded him to do. I think that's a point is made. God's law has been set forth to be obeyed, and the people have not obeyed that law, and therefore there's the problem. Come with me to Ezekiel 43 and verse 10. The point I made is we've seen it last time, where you're going to loathe yourselves when you come back from captivity of what you've done. And see if he doesn't hit this here. And notice what he says. Thou son of man, show the house, that's the temple. So many translations have that, so it's the temple, to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities. Now that tells me why this vision's going. You're going to see it, all of it's, I don't understand why each room has to get higher and higher or wider, but they're bigger and bigger. They're stair-stepped inside in the temple area. But he says, let them measure the pattern. Now, if I were going to literally take that, measure the pattern, I'm going to be, that's 25 cubits, that thing's 50 cubits, that's 60 cubits. And that's the way this wall is. You see the detail. And let them measure the pattern. And if they be ashamed of all that they've done, make known unto them the form of the house and the fashion thereof. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. And the egresses thereof, and the entrances thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof. and all the forms thereof, and all the laws thereof, and write it in their sight, that they may keep the whole form thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and what? Do them. This is the law of the house, law of the temple. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. You going to please me? If this temple were to be built, you'd build it according to what? The pattern, the measurement. Because you didn't follow the pattern of the temple. And to me, it just shows, it wasn't about, we're going to build another one in Jerusalem about the millennium. And it's, well, we're just going to make it all figurative. No, there's a reason for this. And I think he just kind of tells us. When we get all the way over here to chapter 43 and observe that the law is there. And these are the measures of the altar by cubits. And so he hits on the altar. Earlier, it was like 2.5 feet high. And boy, I thought, the altar, that's a big deal. It gets to be a big deal here. 18 feet by 18 feet. And then you got the little altar grid up there. And that's when it starts going up another 2.5 feet. Well, you had to pick that up because you're a reader. And then all of a sudden you said, well, and all of a sudden he hits the big time. Specific measurements. Was there a pattern to follow? That's exactly the way the temple was supposed to be built. And this, you disobeyed the use of the temple. So if you're going to build one for the glory of God, this is what you do. But this hasn't been built. It was the people coming from Babylon captivity. They didn't build this grandeur temple, did they? How you know that? Because they cried because it wasn't big as Solomon's. Don't you remember that? Hadn't been built yet. That's why the people that talk about the 1,000-year reign, this is what they're hoping for. And they read that into that. Well, I'm interested. That's a very, telling why we have this thing, all the details of it is taking place. Now, look at this. I know our time is short here. That's my purpose. That's why I'm thinking the purpose for the minute details. Not that, and if we want to build it again, we know exactly how to build it. I mean, some of this I can't understand, but we'd figure it out. Now let's look at this. What are two things being continually emphasized in chapters 40 through 44? Besides the cubits. Take them off the table. Yes, sir. Okay, and that to me is the law of the house, and they weren't doing that, but he was emphasizing that because what did he tell Moses? You make things according to the pattern, right? And that's your point, I think, and that's true. That's being emphasized. So let's take that and give me two more things that are being emphasized there. All through these chapters, he deals with their sins, of idolatrous sins. And we already read how loathsome they ought to feel of what they did. And just why all of a sudden, not all the Levites, and this is going to be what happens, not all the Levites, they're going to be there serving the temple, but only those of the Zadokites would be offering sacrifices. Remember, 12 tables, instruments here. They're going to be, none of the other priests are going to be offering sacrifices. Well, I thought the priest, you could offer sacrifice. No. Zadok is the only one. Chapter 44 and verse 15. He says, but the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, that kept the charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near to me to minister unto me, and they shall stand before me to offer unto me the fat and the blood. Fat goes to God. These are the sacrifices, saith the Lord. They shall enter to my sanctuary, and they shall come near to my table to minister unto me, and they shall keep my charge. And it says, and it shall be that when they enter at the gates of the inner court, they shall be clothed with linen garments, no wool shall come upon them. So he speaks about that. Verse 23, and they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the common, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean. Zadok would be the ones. And now, historically, this was in the days David had died. Solomon's in charge as king. And Absalom, all the time, with David, Absalom revolted. But we find that during that time period, you had Abiathar and Zadok. They were being faithful. Well, it seemed like the other Levites, they left and followed after Absalom. They didn't stay firm with God, but Zadok did. That's the ones that are going to be serving me. Why do you pick that one? He just told you. Because the emphasis is upon sinning. And the priest, he hits the priest, he hits the sacrifices, he hits the fact that why all these measurements, and it's going to be my pattern. This is the way I would have this glorious temple built, and you'd have to follow them, the details. And we've seen that with Noah, we've seen anything building, Moses, and you didn't do that. In fact, you were worshiping out this east gate. 25 men were in there, and see, that's what Ezekiel got to go in and see what's in the inner court. He saw that. And he talks about it in Ezekiel 8 and 10. And then the glory leaves. And how does that glory leave? Just like it came in the first chapter. He's on the top of the cherubim and he's gone. What's all about? And that's thank you why we have this temple image. The glory of God is coming back. And it's come back. It went through the east gate and he shut the doors. And the prince can go on there just limited time. The ruler would be. But here's the point about Zadok, that you didn't obey my commandments, and the priest, they're the ones they gave in to idolatry. They didn't teach the people the way they should. And while the Levites and a lot of the priests are going to be there involved in helping run the temple, they're not going to offer sacrifice to me. It's going to be men of a pure heart. And he uses Zadok here in the image. And I think there's a good reason for that we're seeing. So there's the point about two things. The idea of the sacrifices being offered, and they had not obeyed the details of the law is there. And it's in the midst of all this numbering. And yet there's not a lot of details being made about the temple inside. The fact that he speaks about that. He didn't give you details about that and talk about the details there. He speaks about how it had been abused. But where God's glory is where his throne is. And that's this river of life is going to flow from that when we turn back to God. Any comments right there yet? Or you might have one, or a question you might have.
I think all of the examples just stem from a pattern that God wants us to follow a pattern. And that transcends today. He's given us a pattern for salvation, a pattern for the church, the local church, for the Lord's Supper. Everything has a pattern.
Yeah.
And that, go back to those times, he wanted to be exact. He wants it to be exact today.
And then he wants that heart to be right. And the heart is holy, and we want to do what he has to do, and all that works together too to obey his law. And that's a good place to begin. We'll talk about this river next time, and then we'll get to the land. The land's going to be interesting too, to see how that's dispersed in this vision as well. Okay, thank you for being here tonight and participating.